Okay, so John-Paul Flintoff, thank you for speaking to me today about your art.
Thank you for having me.
So you have your feet in various camps. So you're a journalist by trade and also an author. And would you
Yeah,
call yourself an illustrator as well? Like,
I
or would
would
you call
now.
yourself an artist? Or is
Well,
and is there a difference?
oh gosh, that's a good
Oh,
question. When I
hard
was at school, I
question.
wanted to be an artist,
Yeah.
not a writer. And I actually won an oil painting competition for that. I didn't win the whole thing, but I got a special prize for being 14-year old and doing a good painting. So I thought I'm going to be an artist, capital A. Um, got discouraged, as I think you know already, and I ended up going into writing as if that was easy, which is a joke. Ended up wanting to be a poet. Realized after a couple of days after leaving university that you can't make money as a poet, so I became a journalist because that seemed like the next best thing. Got really excited about journalism and worked for some really prestigious magazines on staff and then on contract. Um, and that was great and met lots of really interesting people, including I went out of my way to meet artists. So I painted with Billy Childish and I was in Anthony Gormley's studio and anyway, various artists. Um, and then the journalism market is fragile. I was
Hmm.
last year I was offered apparently a special fee because it's me to write for a magazine I used to write for. And on investigation, it turned out that that was exactly half what they paid 10 years ago. So
Wow.
you now have to work twice as hard to make the same living as a journalist. So I started diversifying and I wrote
Yeah.
books. And well, I'd already written one book, but I wrote more books. And I like writing books. There's a different rhythm to them. They're not so ephemeral. You can develop things over time. And I've illustrated several of my books. And the latest one is actually illustrated poetry. So I am a poet and an illustrator.
Lovely.
I
Going
think I
back to your
call myself an
roots.
artist. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Long
Okay.
answer to the question.
Yeah. So so you've tried different, well, you've got a portfolio career, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah.
You have to basically make things work financially. But
Yeah.
you've come back to illustration or art quite
Yeah.
late, I gather.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So why did you sort of come back to art? Was there a particular thing that made you um kind of
There is.
restart?
And I could deliver a whole hour-long talk about it, but I won't because I know time's short. It's not because I don't like going into it. I don't mind talking about it. But I had a breakdown. I went into psychiatric hospital, and I felt like everything was, there's no future. Everything was over for me. It was all rubbish. What's the point of anything? And I suppose that the great blessing of hitting that kind of rock bottom is that everything would appear to be all up. And because I was kind of just if it's hard to explain, but it feels like slightly like a rebirth, like a new version of me. Like I haven't put any clothes on yet. I don't know what I'm like. What is this thing? And I started drawing. I just drew to
Mm,
try to understand my situation, partly to avoid the rumination. The trap of ruminating is just horrific, and the negative voices when they get a hold is really bad. So for me, words were almost like poison, and I wanted to get away from words and put things into pictures. So I started
interesting.
drawing, and I over the course of I was in hospital initially as an inpatient, and then for a long period afterwards, also as a regular outpatient. Probably over that couple of months, I mostly drew, but sometimes painted about 250 pictures.
Wow.
Some of them are very raw, and some of them, and over time, they gradually become sunnier. And I started drawing things that had more color and like blossom
Mm,
from being very stark initially.
mm. What kind of stuff were you drawing during that time? Were they self-portraits or um
Often, one of the things that I started doing very early on was because a therapist talked about making friends with my inner child, and I didn't know really what that meant.
mm,
So I just drew me as I am, specky 50-year-old, and a little boy who was quite sweet. And I would have these little adventures, and we'd talk to each other in the pictures. And if I was stressed, the little boy would look anxious. Or sometimes the boy looked a bit lost, and I'd try and look after him. This was in the drawing, so it was representational for myself about
mm,
what does it even mean to have this like inner child? I didn't really get it. And
Mm.
I'm not averse to touchy-feely Californian kind of stuff, but I just didn't really get it. But this helped me to get it. This idea of looking after that little part of me that just needs looking after.
Mm.
Um, and then there was a time when in therapy, am I allowed to use the C word? Well, I've done it like that now. There was a time in therapy when I used that word against myself. I said I was a
Right.
worthless C word, and everyone looked so shocked and clearly didn't understand how I could think that about myself. So I could see that in their faces, but I did think that about myself. Thought they were just being nice. So I went back to my room and I drew the little boy version of, but without me in the picture, just him, just small down at the bottom of the frame, right down at the bottom on a chair. And
Mm.
at the top of the picture, I wrote the words worthless C word. And it really suddenly just went, ow, that's what I'm doing to myself when I
Mm.
describe myself. It's like calling that little boy that thing. So I've suddenly had this amazingly powerful, I mean, apart from anything else, it was helpful, remedial, because I stopped calling myself that. But it was also sort of an incredible insight into the power of visualization and art and drawing something and representing it and thinking about it and what does it mean and who are the people on the page, and realizing that
Mm.
really anyone I draw is always a kind of an element of me, because I can't draw someone dancing without sort of slightly thinking I'm dancing. I can't do it.
Mm.
So that became really wonderful. It was like this whole new play space.
Mm.
Everything that I'm drawing is partly me, and starting to notice that without forcing myself, because the last thing I wanted was to like draw cheerful pictures because someone told me to. But
Mm.
if I found myself drawing something beautiful like blossom, I thought, wow, that's quite a good sign.
Mm. Right. Okay. Yeah. To come back to your poetry and your illustration now, because just as sort of as you were talking, I was thinking about that kind of process of visualization. Like, do you, when you're writing poetry, do you think visually, or do you think visually and then write the poetry? Like, what comes, but does it have, do you
That's a
have
lovely
intersection?
question. I found it such a wonderful experience and such a blessing to be allowed to write a book by a publisher of illustrated poetry. And the truth is, it sometimes varied. Sometimes I'd have an idea for a poem or an idea, or a sort of one is often a forcing function for the other.
Mm.
Just as if imagine there were no illustrations at all, and I were trying to think how am I going to write a poem, I might say, well, I'll just do a haiku. I don't know what it's about, but if you've got that constraint of it being a haiku, then whatever's on my mind had to be poured into 17 syllables.
Right.
Everything else had to go, and
Mm.
and then I might, and then I had this wonderful experience which I've not had before because this is the first book of that type, where I'd think, do I want to illustrate this in a complementary or a contrasting way? Does this deserve to be if this is somewhat upbeat or even sometimes funny, does it need to have a picture that's also like that, or could it
Mm.
be startling and jarring? And I love playing around with that. And
Mm.
quite late in the process I was moving pictures from one poem to another and thinking, don't know. And then also there's
Mm.
the flow of a book, because you,
Yeah.
you want it to have a certain kind of sequence. So I didn't want to have too many pictures of all the same color, and then so many variables at play.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting that you would write something and then you'd move the bit, like making the connections yourself. I wonder how many I mean you probably know this, but like how many poets can actually illustrate their work as well. Like, or
Well, that is a
whether you're quite unique or rare.
I think it is a bit unusual. It's
Mm.
also there are a number of them, and I actually found one of my poems is about the depressing experience of reading a book about creative, artistic types who are all nuts, and
Yeah.
a lot of them were people who wrote poems and illustrated them. So that was a bit depressing. So I wrote what I thought was a funny poem about throwing that book out of the window and its pages turned into the wings of angels, because I thought that's me going mad. But anyway, so
What's this book called? We should
it's K. Redfern Jameson. Oh, I can't remember, something like Fire or Redfield Jameson. Anyway, I'm sure she's great and everything, but I just read it and I thought I'm just still too vulnerable from coming out of hospital for this thing. So, but Mervyn Peake is one, who's a great illustrator who also wrote
Mervyn Peake.
verse. And now I'm going to forget everything, but there are others. tend to be a little bit bonkers. But maybe
Yeah.
that doesn't have to be the case.
Well, I don't know Mervyn Peake, so I'll look up his work. So about your illustration, how would you describe it, or how would you describe your style? Do you have a style that you could say it's this? This is
I
what I
would say
do.
that my style at the moment, anyway, because it's changed a huge amount since the very raw line drawings on paper. Um, I now draw very enthusiastically on the iPad. I love it so much, and I've got an app called Procreate,
Mm-hmm.
and um, I suppose the style is quite energetic, almost a bit, moving towards being a bit frenziedly energetic because the lines don't even attempt to be straight when they're meant to be. And I really like drawing human situations, but weirdly, in the last few weeks, I've just drawn tons of pictures of the streets around me.
Yeah.
Um, I had thought that this was a really bad time of year, and we're talking at the end of January. I had thought this was going to be a really boring time of year because all the colour's gone and it's all a bit drab. It's been great fun noticing what there is to do with light and street lights and the glow of a foggy day. And how do you represent that? It's just brilliant. I'm loving it.
Interesting, yeah. And actually I've seen some of those streetscapes on your Instagram, which is great. I would recommend people have a look at it. And so do you start with a photograph that you've taken and then work from that, or how are you working it on Procreate?
Most of the time now, I'm taking a photograph while I'm out walking my dog, but it's too cold to draw on the iPad outside. But I was in the summer drawing in the street, so I probably will go back to that. A part of me still thinks it's cheating to use photographs as a reference.
Mm.
But on the other hand, sometimes I actually do a hybrid where I draw it on a piece of paper and use that as the shape so it doesn't have the slightly wide angle lens effect of the photographic reference because my
Right.
iPhone slightly is wide angle. Um, so I might take my line drawing and then color on top of that. I don't draw on top of the photo. I use it as a reference.
Mm.
I think I would not have any self-respect if I drew on top. Everyone, each to their own. But for me,
Yeah.
that would be like cheating, and it's so silly that I think about this all the time. Like, what is
Yeah.
cheating? Why is it
Yeah.
cheating? I thought drawing on an iPad was cheating, full stop.
Mm.
But then I thought maybe the impressionists all used to think they were cheating because they had those funny little things on the brush, the metal thing that made it possible to have a flat brush. They probably go, "Oh God, I'm cheating! Look at me!" Titian never had that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I used to think this, that it was somehow easier for artists to work on Procreate, and I
Yeah,
sort of had a particular take on, for example, David Hockney's iPad paintings, thinking, well,
yeah,
he's a really talented artist. He can
yeah,
do the real thing, but
yeah,
actually after having had lots of engaging conversations with artists about this, I just have completely changed my mind on it, But it's interesting you say that, using photographs feels like cheating, because that's a debate that's been happening since
yeah.
photography was even,
Totally.
invented. It's like this is
Yeah,
a debate that's 100, well, nearly 200 years old, really. Artists
yes,
took against it in the 19th century, didn't they? That, photographers were kind of stealing their thunder, but then actually artists like Degas started
yeah. He must
to
have really beat himself up, I should imagine. Oh,
exactly.
look how I've cropped these ballerinas.
Exactly. So yeah, it's an age-old debate, really. Um,
But
so
actually, it
do,
does work the other way because yes, just now I was taking some of these are giclée prints, and I took some of them down, and one of them scratched, and I thought, oh no, if that was a proper painting, it wouldn't have scratched. So it
yeah.
it makes me want to go and do some more oil painting, and I do that occasionally.
Mm.
And it's also made me think I'm going to change the way that I do. This drawing on the iPad is definitely going to change the way I paint.
Right, okay. In what way?
There's something about the freedom and the rapidity in which I've been able to do glazes and overlaying and not worrying too much about matching up layers of color and getting the same,
Mm.
so that there's a soft edge. I'm going to do that more with oil painting, and take
Yeah.
the same very rapid, freewheeling, not caring too much about it
Mm.
approach.
That's really, really interesting. The way that technology is basically, and quite recent technology has basically changed the way that you produce work, and
Mm.
has had an effect on your style as well. If that's, if you're
Yes,
going to be more loose and free and not worry about things, it's shifting the way that you think about art.
very
That's
much
kind
so.
of amazing, really. Do you have any how are we doing for time, by the way? Do you want to go on for two? I can't remember when we started, but anyway, I do have one. Let's have one more question, or two
Can
more
I
questions,
can I show
actually.
you something just before you do the question? Because
Yeah, go
you
on.
might have seen these, and I quite like them. But can I share screen?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh,
Okay,
you should be able to. Yeah.
yeah, I think so. Okay, so this started on Instagram, and it was just a totally idle thing. So on Instagram, I drew the sicker
Oh,
picture, and
yes.
and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
stuck myself in, and I posted it. And that's the thing about Instagram; it's just so quick, and
Mm,
like, why wouldn't I? It's just a
yeah,
sketch. And then the same afternoon, while watching the same movie, Kind Hearts and Coronets, I just thought, well, I'll do another one. I'll do, I don't know, Picasso. It's not good, but it doesn't matter. That's the one I'm least happy with. And then I did like, okay, I'll do Millet, and then I'll do Velasquez. And so then it became this game of what can I stick myself in next? Okay, there's Lautrec,
yeah.
and there's Modigliani, and Rouault. Anyway, it ended up with me doing 81 of these.
Wow.
And I extended into all sorts of different artistic traditions.
Nice.
And I just had such fun. I mean, it was just brilliant fun. And I wouldn't
Yeah.
have done it if I didn't have Procreate.
Yeah.
And because it made it seem so quick and easy and light, and I could be mostly, as you can see, I'm mucking about and being silly,
Yeah.
which is great. And for
I
me,
love
that's
it.
a big deal because actually, I told you already about how over serious everything had been for me not that long ago. I
Yeah.
like mucking about and being silly.
So
So,
are these anywhere? Can people look at these? Have you got a collection somewhere, or
I've
is it all
got,
just on your laptop?
well, it's on. Someone told me that I should do some sort of gallery and show, or put a book together or something, and turn them into something. And I therefore I ought to hide them, but I don't know if that's true or not.
That's so great. I
It
love
made me laugh.
them.
You know, the truth is, the reason why I wanted to show you this is my mum wants me to publish them as a book,
Yeah.
and I'll do it just for my mum, really,
Yeah.
quite
I think it
honestly.
would make a really nice book, actually. I
My
think,
my agent just isn't biting,
why
but
not?
I think it
No,
would
I
be a
think
good
that's a
book.
good one. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
imagine that in an art bookshop, you know.
great, thank you. Well, I'll
Um,
have to think how to pitch it to him again then.
so
Yeah.
I was looking at your YouTube channel. I just tell us about your what's adequate projects, because
Okay.
I looked at that
I,
on YouTube. So what's that all about?
it was a bit like Patreon, but I didn't want to do Patreon because like that's just another platform that someone else owns. And then I found this guy, a writer who's based in Japan, and he had this thing called Special Projects, and I'm one of his patrons or whatever he calls it. And I thought I'm going to copy that, and I did copy it for a while. I called it Special Projects, and it's like an email. It's a bit like Substack, basically. Some people pay me a yearly thing, some people pay me every month, basically just to support my projects. So it's totally
Okay.
just a gift thing. I do send them a print every so often, but there's not much in it for them except for feeling warm about helping someone. And I thought I'd better call it something other than Special Projects because I felt like I was copying him. So I called it Adequate Projects because my last book one was called An Adequate Book About How to, no, a modest book about how to make an adequate speech. So
Right.
I'll own the Adequate brand.
So that's just for people to sort of sign up and support you and what you'll
Yeah,
update them on the kind of
yeah,
work that you do. And
yeah, exactly.
you also do other YouTube stuff as well, don't you? Like, is it teaching, tutoring?
I've
What?
done lots of teaching in my time, and I just thought this year I just feel like doing live streams as often as I feel like. And I've always felt like I can't inflict these on the whole world. But now I'm just like, I'll do it to myself. I don't really
Yeah.
give a toss. So I'm doing an art one on Mondays.
Yeah.
I'm doing a thing about journalism on Wednesdays, and I'm doing what am I doing? Oh, rhetoric, because it kind of combines the public speaking and writing and everything on
Right.
Fridays. So
Okay.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm just doing a live stream for
So you
myself.
do on different topics, not
Yeah.
just related to art, but on various other things as well.
Well, the art one is Mondays, so I'm mostly
Mondays.
making art, but I might do something about, I don't know, where I get my prints done or ideas, or I might show those portraits of the artist in a what's it that I've just shown you.
Yeah, yeah. I see. Okay. I did see something, was it on your Instagram? Was it on YouTube? I can't remember. About a tour that you did recently of Hampstead with
Oh
about
yeah,
Constable.
yes.
And I wondered whether he was like one of your, or who's your kind of inspiration? Who do you
Oh, I
which
think my
artists are you really into?
oh, I love.
They don't have to be old artists, they can be contemporary artists.
Well, I really, really love Quentin Blake. I always have, and so there's something about his energy that I think I've somehow attempted anyway to absorb.
Absolutely. I was gonna say you are quite Quentin Blake in a
It's
way.
something that people do say
Yeah,
spontaneously, which pleases me so much. Um, the color, I really just adore Matisse, and I've done a lot of copies of Matisse just to try and get my head around this idea of color, because I used to be so much a line and cross hatching person, and playing with color is just so nice.
mm,
Um, I think I'm increasingly grabbed by anyone who does sort of remarkable things with light. So clearly Vermeer's in there, and you name it. But Rembrandt also for his humanity. I love the human interaction, despite all of these empty streets I'm doing recently. If I can draw a human interaction, this one is a scene from a film which is tipped for the Oscars called The Quiet Girl. I just thought it was so moving, and I like the fact of the scene having four people in it. So I just sketched it on the iPad while I was watching it. It's a bit of a mess, like lots of my pictures, but I think it captures the light coming in from the side. I remember thinking, gosh,
mm.
this film's been directed by Vermeer. It's almost as if it was like that. So I'm really, really keen on those.
Right. Okay. Great. Well, listen, we have to wrap up.
Thank you.
But yeah, thank you for talking to me today. It's been really great to get to know you and to find out more about your work, which I love. So yeah,
Well,
thank
thank
you.
you.
All
Thank
right.
you so much. It's really been such a pleasure to suddenly find you and then be in touch and be doing this conversation. It's great. And
Well,
I'm
yeah.
really impressed by your Substack. And I hope gazillions of people will sign up and pay top dollar.
Thanks, John Paul.